Welcome this morning to the Global UAE Virtual Energy Forum, where we're taking around the world temperature, if you like, a crystal ball outlook for the year ahead. And we're delighted to be joined by Ibrahim El Zubi, Senior Vice President for Sustainability, Climate, and ESG at ADNOC. Thank you so much, Ibrahim.
Hi, Sean. It's good to be with you again. Thanks for
Pleasure,
having me.
and mabruk on this new position. Very exciting beginning of the year, a year in which, of course, the UAE will host COP28, and a year in which ADNOC's transformation marches on. And we want to talk, as we look to the year ahead, about ADNOC's transformation, embracing the energy transition. And the famous quote by His Excellency Sultan Al Jaber at ADIPEC last year: maximum energy, minimum emissions. So I want to kick off with asking you, how is it viable for an energy company, one particularly the scale of ADNOC, to simultaneously be pro-growth, pro-sustainability, pro-prosperity, and pro-climate, as Sultan Al Jaber said at ADIPEC, and? How do they all go together? How do all those balls stay in the air from ADNOC's perspective?
Thank you very much, Sean, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And especially with this exciting and interesting time for sustainability practitioners to start with, and for the region as well. We just closed COP27, and now we already started actually preparing for COP28 as a nation. And as you know, UAE has a track record on getting the world together and getting things done. And ADNOC is part of the United Arab Emirates community, economy, as well as has a track record and full commitment towards sustainability and affordable and low emissions energy, which is now an important topic, not only in this part of the world. It's a global hot topic, especially what's going on globally right now. So let me highlight the fact that when it comes to ADNOC, our business is energy. So we are a responsible energy producer. And now you just cannot unplug the energy system of today until the system of tomorrow is ready. And hence, His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber's speech talked about the and. We want to look at the sustainability. And I think energy producers and sustainability is look at three main pillars: looks at the economy, the society, and the environment. And the three ands you've mentioned, or the four ands, I believe covers the whole thing. And if we're in alignment on that, you need an implementation partner. And this is where a responsible energy producer such as ADNOC can come and pragmatically as well, in a pragmatic way, realistic way, ensure that these three pillars will be achieved.
For a long time, just to jump on that, for a long time, there's been a certain view that pro-sustainability didn't necessarily go with pro-prosperity or pro-growth because it was seen more as a cost burden. Now that's obviously shifted quite dramatically. ADNOC's perspective on that, I would imagine, is both as a good climate citizen, but also it's just good economics.
Absolutely. Again, being realistic goes both ways. We are aware that renewables or other energy sources will be the future energy sources as well. So it makes a lot of sense as well that while we are still producing low emissions energy, we also need to invest and prepare for the future. And this means is investing in energy that people will be more in demand, such as the renewables. Hence, you've seen different partnerships that we've done in the last couple of weeks, such as what we've done, the new partnership under the Abu Dhabi future energy company Masdar, which has plans to grow its renewable energy capacity to well over 100 gigawatt by 2030. And I believe, if you ask me as a pure sustainability expert, I believe this is best realistic way to ensure that the triple bottom line approach for sustainability, and I remind myself and remind everyone listening to us what's the triple bottom line approach, and which we shouldn't forget for sustainability, which is planet, profit, and people. So this is a way pragmatic way on implementing proper sustainability best practices when it comes to a subject matters expert, which is the energy we talk about here. So it's important that, again, to keep to ensure that the tap is not closed yet till we are ready for the future. And this is what exactly we're doing. And this is exactly what His Excellency meant by the which serves everyone, doing well by doing well, serving the community and serving us as a business.
You mentioned there the partnership with the Masdar joint venture now with Mubadala, with TACA, making what will one believe probably a world beater or certainly world competitive, world scale in terms of renewable energy at Masdar. What are perhaps some other partnerships or other technologies that ADNOC is looking at in order to sort of achieve its journey towards net zero and the country's journey to net zero?
Okay, Sean, that's a great question. Thank you. And let me just remind everyone that ADNOC is fully committed to be net zero by 2050. And we are also committed to reduce our carbon intensity by 25% by 2030. So to do that, you need enablers. And one of the best enablers in general when it comes to climate change and net zero is technology. So to do that, we need to take a real action to decarbonize our own operations and portfolio where possible, while also supporting our customers to decarbonize. So the first technology we're looking at and we're implementing as we speak is the decarbonization technologies. And also we have expanded investments in zero carbon energies, including wind, solar, and hydrogen for sure. So this is when we look at renewables or zero carbon future energies. Also the partnership with Masdar that I mentioned, with capacity over 100 gigawatt by 2030. Also, we have plans to significantly grow our hydrogen production in support of the UAE's ambition to supply up to 25% of hydrogen demand in key global markets. This is something for us is a key issue internally and externally and even nationwide. So
what about the role of carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS as it's commonly referred to? This is a big opportunity. It's a technology that has been somewhat piloted around the world, never really scaled up to full economic viability. What's ADNOC's plans for CCUS?
That's another good point, another good question, Sean. Thank you for that. So to continue on the net zero ambition that I've mentioned, we need also to focus on key decarbonization levers. So this includes for sure an industrial scale implementation of CCUS. So I remind I'm sure our listeners may know that in 2016, we built the region's first commercial scale CCUS facilities, Riyadh. Also, there's a growing alignment that climate goals cannot be achieved without widespread adoption of multiple carbon capture technologies. So when you talk about technologies and carbon capture, they absolutely go hand in hand. Also, one of the things also we're pursuing is to expand our CO2 capture capacity sixfold to approximately 5 million tons per year by 2030. So again,
that's quite ambitious.
That's ambitious, but yet pragmatic. We have an ambition, and we are using technology as an enabler, as well as an investment, the economic side, and it's on the ground. For any sustainability ambition to happen, regardless where you work, this should be the project plan and the roadmap for a net zero ambition, which we are doing right now in ADNOC.
ADNOC has also set a pretty ambitious target for methane intensity, target of 0.15%, 0.15% by 2025, which feels like it's just going to be tomorrow, which is the lowest in the Middle East. How
Yes.
will ADNOC achieve its ambition of methane reduction?
Um, I'll again confirm our new methane intensity target is ranked, as you've mentioned, the lowest in the Middle East, but also it's in the gold standard category by the Oil and Gas Methane Partnership 2.0, which is managed by the United Nations Environment Program. This is the only measurement-based reporting framework for the global oil and gas industry. So our first step is to look at approved and agreed on framework. And to do that, we need to first to improve the accuracy and transparency of our methane emissions management using technology, drones, smart metering, and reporting by using as well, looking at advanced emissions monitoring technology solutions, including both on the ground and the satellite. So how we are achieving it? We are working on ensuring that we have a transparent and accurate methane emissions management and reporting technologies using the satellites as well as the ground operations. So we look at partnerships through the OGMP. So why we're there in the OGMP? Not also to look for a standard, but also for a cross-sectoral collaboration when it comes to the methane emissions using technologies. And methane is such an important gas when it comes to climate change and climate action. It's responsible in a big chunk of GHG emissions. And if we go after that, I believe it's not only good for the environment, but also it's bold commitment from companies that target such a low emissions target.
Just to wrap up, Ibrahim, ADNOC was the first hydrocarbon company in the world to source 100% of its grid energy from clean nuclear and solar power. And I'm wondering, can you share what are some of the next groundbreaking pioneering targets that ADNOC may have? You had mentioned there the methane target and others. Is there anything else that you're able to share looking this year ahead for COP28?
Thank you, Sean. And for this question, maybe we'll wrap how sustainability practitioners in general should look at and approach net zero ambitions, and it should embed sustainability in the heart of everything we do. At ADNOC, sustainability is at the heart of everything we do. And what do I mean by that? It means the minute we set an ambition, we go and ensure that we've done the homework and we implement it from a practical way. So since the beginning of 2022, as you've mentioned, we were the only hydrocarbon company to source 100% of its grid power from nuclear and solar energy. And that's the decarbonization part I've mentioned about to achieve our net zero 2030 or 25% by 2030. But also we are the second part, we were also the first in the region to deploy carbon capture on an industrial scale. So we promote a pioneering mindset and empowers practical and sustainable solutions using technology. So the next step for us is, you may hear the announcement recently about our bold investment of $15 billion for landmark decarbonization projects by 2030, including carbon capture, electrification, and enhanced investments in hydrogen and renewables. So for us,
it's certainly big dollar numbers, Ibrahim. There's no doubt about it. It's sort of talking the talk and also walking the walk. We're going to have to wrap it up there. It's been great to have your insights and outlook for this very important journey, ADNOC's transformation as it embraces the energy transition and sustainability. Ibrahim El-Zoubi, Senior Vice President, Sustainability, Climate and ESG at ADNOC. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. And again, as we mentioned, sustainability means business for us. And we invite, through this platform, global technology and industry leaders to work in partnership with us and drive really real action and change to embrace the energy transition. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Well, thank you, Ibrahim El-Zubi, the new Senior Vice President for Sustainability and Climate at ADNOC. And there's no doubt that it's clear that in ADNOC's transformation over the last 5 years, and as it accelerates over the next 5 years, that sustainability and the energy transition will be central to that. Their ambitions to strive to produce the lowest carbon oil in the world. And with that, massive amounts of opportunity with all of their partners in the exercise of that. We're going to go to the next stage of that conversation and look as in that upstream discussion that obviously ADNOC being the largest upstream producer of the UAE, and then we're now going to talk with others who are in that business across the region and have a discussion of what the outlook for upstream expansion plans are and some of the challenges that may be faced. So I'd like to invite our panelists to come up and invite them to turn on their cameras. Hatem El-Moussa, the CEO of Sharjah National Oil Corporation. Sarah Akbar, Chairperson and CEO of Oilserve Kuwait and Non-Executive Director of Petrofac. Peter Zellinger, Senior Vice President of OMV, one of the partner operators with ADNOC in Abu Dhabi. Walter Simpson, Managing Director of CCED, which is an independent oil operator in Muscat in Oman, where they're producing about 40,000 barrels of oil a day. So I welcome everybody, and the title of our sort of discussion now is what challenges will face the Gulf oil and gas industry in 2023 as it strives to expedite production capacity expansion programs. Clearly, it seems we start 23 with the greater burden on the national energy sector in the Middle East and the Gulf to meet the growth demand in the world as the international majors. We're seeing America, the United States, still a million barrels below pre-COVID levels, still not coming back. Obviously, Russia now challenged by the sanctions and war and may see its own production levels deplete. So a lot of expectation on the Gulf to meet the new incremental demand growth as we go forward in 23 and beyond. I'd like to start our conversation by inviting each of our speakers to tell us a little bit about what the expansion plans are in their corner of the Gulf. And let's kick off. Obviously, we just heard from the head of sustainability at ADNOC, and he talked about, Peter, and maximum energy, minimum emissions, which is the sort of North Star for ADNOC. What is happening? What are the sort of specific expansion plans in Abu Dhabi and with OMV are involved with? Peter Zellinger.
Yeah, thank you, Sean, and good morning to everyone. Interesting interview before, and it shows already the name of the game. I think it's a parallel growth between low carbon and the traditional carbon business. Whether the speed of low carbon is aligned with the growth in the traditional business remains to be seen. But what is happening here is clearly growth. We have seen the announcement from ADNOC recently, 150 billion US dollars budget until 2030, 15 billion in low carbon. So you see already a bit the dimension, but this is growth. And of course, then the big topic was the increase or the acceleration of the capacity increase to 5 million barrels per day instead of 2030, now 2027. And as far as I know, ADNOC, usually they are very, very good in achieving targets. So if ADNOC announces an acceleration of a target, then I'm pretty sure that this can be achieved and maybe also surprisingly achieved in a very, very, very good manner. So the growth proposition is, of course, now twofold, as I said, growth in production capacity. And I think one number is really important that is not so much talked about, but it's available on the website. If you look at the reserve production ratio, And if you look at the announcement that by 2050, ADNOC wants to be carbon neutral, and the area actually basically strives for carbon neutrality. Question is it scope 3 or is it only scope 1 and scope 2? Then you look at the reserve life and the massive reserves that are in the ground in UAE, and then you see that there's no way then other to expand your production capacity. I mean, my calculation gives me more than 50 years of reserves life. We are in the year 2023 plus 50, so you go well in the 2070 with the reserves life under the new production target. So I think further growth in order to achieve the neutrality, if you want to go into scope 3, is necessary. But the first step, ambitious step now is a 5 million barrels. That is the immediate focus for the next year.
Well, that's no insignificant number, particularly the idea of bringing forward 5 million. I think the previous target was 2030. Now we're talking about 2027, which is 3 years earlier, and still at 5 million is a big target. And even with the ambition and capability of ADNOC, we will come back to some of the challenges that may come out of ADNOC's hands, the availability of talent, raw materials, and technology that one needs to do all of these magic things. And let's go to Kuwait with Sarah Akbar, CEO of Oilserve Kuwait. Sarah, what's the plans for Kuwait's expansion? Similar, I mean, once upon a time, you were a comparable size to Abu Dhabi. It seemed neck and neck, same OPEC quota and so forth. Abu Dhabi seems to have slightly moved ahead now. What is the outlook for Kuwait?
Thank you, Sean. So in Kuwait, the biggest news was, of course, as you remember, we have this new refinery in operation, which is one of the largest refineries in the country, and I guess in the Middle East, about 600,000 barrels of refining capacity. And most of those products that will be produced with refinery will actually be exported, because the domestic use here is not big, as you know. So on the refining side, I think we have made very good strides into where we want to be. But on the upstream, the target for the upstream is about 4 million barrels. And the current capacity is like 2.8 something, is far away from that yet. So this year, there is an expansion plan. And as a result, they have to add another 30 rigs in order to expedite some of the drilling and to try to build up some capacity. The problem here is the issues are not about the reservoirs or about the reserves, the ability to produce. The issue is the cycle it takes in order to build a facility and the bureaucracy. So everyone is aware of this bureaucracy that is stopping the progress. And I think with this new minister, as you know, there is a new management in KPC, new management in the companies, and a new oil minister who are completely aligned now in order to remove a lot of that bureaucracy, in order to make them more efficient in applying and expediting the cycle for project implementation. Because the main issue here is actually water cut and the amount of water that they need to handle in order to increase production. And for that, they need facilities. And for every facility, the cycle for building a facility in Kuwait is around 5 to 7 years, which is completely ridiculous. And I think, so on the top of agenda is actually to streamline that process in order to expedite having facilities in order to achieve the production targets they have. So they are doing two things in parallel. Brought in some more rigs in order to expedite drilling, but at the same time trying to unleash the potential by adding new facilities and so on. So the target is 4 million, but I really have not seen a timing. It's about 2030, I guess, is the time for that 4 million. So it's going to take some time, but there is some serious changes within the sector in order to make them achieve those targets.
There's no doubt that water cut is a big challenge in the aging Bergan oil field. And Oman has certainly a lot of experience with that challenge. And I think that's what's kind of interesting for this common narrative, because obviously all of the reservoirs of the Gulf are similar in their sort of carbonate structures. And so water cut is a challenge everybody is going to face, one would think, inevitably. Walter Simpson, what is the state of play with your operations in Oman and Oman in general in terms of expansion plans?
Well, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Sean. Not anything different from what you've heard already, I think. Very simply, full steam ahead with how I describe not just our plans, but also what Oman is driving for. The sector here is crucial to the economy. I think oil revenues are about 70% of the revenue taken by the country, so vital that that revenue is maintained. If there are plans for diversification, recent announcement of the hydrogen plans, all of that needs to be funded from these oil revenues. So the sector is crucially important to us. And there is a drive for expansion of not just the facilities that are existing and the producing fields, but also new exploration. Our position, we've increased capacity to explore more. We're shooting seismic. We've added rigs. And I think that's true for the whole country. It's a question of get after things. Let's get that revenue in to support the diversification that the country wants in terms of its energy mix going forward. So yeah, as I started with, full steam ahead here, no doubt about that.
Full steam ahead while quotas are being cut. But anyway, that's the nature of the beast. We'd like to welcome our 250 viewers on LinkedIn and over 100 here on Zoom. Hatem El Moussa, CEO of Sharjah National Oil Corporation. Despite your name, you are actually expanding in the production of natural gas. What's the current outlook in Sharjah and the Northern Emirates of the UAE?
Hi, Sean, and everybody. Thanks for having me. Our plans basically is to continue what we have been doing for the last 2 years. We have a continuous drilling program for all of the next 2 years at least, potentially beyond in the existing field that was discovered recently and into exploration. At the same time, of course, we are also expanding our LPG business by upgrading our LPG export terminal to become an export and import terminal. Hopefully that expansion would enter also in the international markets, not just the local market. We just finished expanding our gas storage capacity just beginning of this month. To increase the capacity of our new gas storage facility, with plans to expand it further by the end of this year, beginning of next year, to drilling in the reservoir where the gas storage is. We have set for ourselves a very challenging target on net zero, to achieve net zero on our own operations within 10 years. And the exact plan is not yet solid, but the very first step would be converting our own power consumption to renewables.
Just to Hatem, I was just going to ask you on that point, what are you defining as net zero? Net zero operations, net zero, what is your...
Net zero on all of our carbon emissions within SNOC. So basically, all the power we use, all the turbines that burn gas, all the heaters that burn gas, all the vehicles that burn gasoline, to achieve net zero on that within 10 years. I know it is an extremely challenging target to achieve. I don't think anybody...
Are you willing to compromise on output capacity in order to achieve that? Is that...
No competition with output capacity. I mean, if we actually achieve that, that would be a first in the oil industry.
Yes. Worth. I mean, one has to have a North Star target, right? I mean, that's step number one. I want to now talk a little bit about the challenges to achieve these things. We've seen coming out of COVID, obviously, we had some very significant challenges regarding people being able to move, literally travel, getting expertise to the fields, and then with that sort of solutions that came as a result into everybody's business, but also into the operational activities in the field in terms of how to solve a problem when maybe the technology expert is 5,000-10,000 miles away. But Peter, as we look at some of the ambitions in the region, and you articulated at your comments that the particular outlook for Abu Dhabi is one of expediting, of accelerating, and I think that is going to become increasingly and is a familiar ambition, because inevitably the big narrative about, you know, how long does one have the opportunity to sell hydrocarbons for, let's produce and accelerate their production over the coming decades. But I wanted just to speak a little bit to that challenge of acceleration. What are part of that challenge? Certainly access to capital, and of course you're an international company operating in Abu Dhabi as well. If you might just speak to some of the challenges that come with acceleration.
You mentioned it already. I think the big target is a competition for resources, and a competition within the Gulf states for those resources. I only mentioned Saudi. There's expansion plans as well. The rig fleet of this world is driving towards Saudi, as I see, but now also Qatar and Kuwait, as I see. So there is, of course, a competition for resources, and let's focus on human resources, mint, for example, skilled labor, but especially mint professions, but also financial resources. And financial resources is the topic for all the European companies, at least. I mean, the number of $150 billion budget for ADNOC alone in the next years until 2030 is an impressive number. But let's not forget there's many partners, international European partners that bring their share in. Now the financing of those budgets becomes more and more difficult if you, and I think Sarah said it, if you look at our industry cycle of, let's say, from exploration to abandonment of 40 years. So you look already for new projects, let's say offshore, to a 40 years investment climate. Now, who is financing those investment climate? Who is financing those investments in hydrocarbons from a European standpoint? This becomes more and more complicated. That's why there will be a prudent shift to lower carbon footprint, but also to more gas. And by the way, what I missed before when I said the expansion in the oil is just one step. UAE wants to become self-sufficient in gas and deliver, and I think double their LNG capacity also in the next 5 years. So that comes on top of it. And with that comes, and I think this is not so ambitious yet, and we will see more, comes a 5 million tons of CCS, which, by the way, is the size of a larger project in the North Sea, or our company OMV, much smaller company than ADNOC, has already announced to build a CCS storage capacity by 2030 of 5 million tons. So I think ADNOC is just starting to show that, because I guess you will now have a competition for financial resources, not only from the financial markets, but also from within the companies. In order to build a low carbon business, you have to attract resources in technical resources, but also financial resources. And I think the 15 billion that ADNOC announced is just the spearhead. There's more to come, and the whole region will follow that, because the goal is, as His Excellency Dr. Sultan Al Jaber said, more energy, lower footprint, lower carbon footprint. And this basically needs to bring up the investments in low carbon business, while at the same time maintaining and expanding your capacity in the traditional oil and gas business. And therefore, I see a huge competition within the region for human resources, but also for financial resources.
Sarah, picking up on that, obviously you are the CEO of Oil Serve Kuwait. You sit on the board of Petrofac, operating oil services field across the region. Peter, Walter, and Hatem should be really very nice to you, because one of the other challenges, of course, is the capacity of your peer group. The shoe is on the other foot right now after they were squeezing you for a number of years. Now it's very much you are the sort of ball, the sort of bride of the ball, or whatever the appropriate analogy is. But just speak to us to some of the challenge and limitations or not thereof in the oil services space in order to meet all of these ambitions.
So as you know, Sean, and Sean, what happens when we are going through the cycle is that the people who are truly, really squeezed are those who provide the services, being the EPC contractors or the, and when the upstream companies come off the cycle by the increased oil price, they don't go back to the service companies and compensate them for the squeezing that they did. So there's a huge lag between when the upstream companies actually start being healthy and when the service sector becomes healthy. So as a result of the past 4 or 5 years, most of the service companies are actually struggling because they lost a lot of their people, the margins were very bad, and many companies went into serious problems. Now, as a result, a lot of those companies are not very healthy at this point in time to provide the kind of service that many of these international companies would demand of them. And you will see that the pricing will go back. They will have to go back for these companies to become healthy enough in order to provide the service that are needed. Now, the other issue, I think, which Peter mentioned, was the ability to access funding from the international banks. And there are huge limitations now from these banks in providing the funding for these companies in order to grow the businesses and to be able to provide the necessary support to the upstream sector that needs these kind of services in order to achieve the targets that we are talking about. So as a result of this discussion, I believe the service sector, being EPC sector, being all types of services that are provided to the upstream, will have to increase their pricing in order to compensate for what happened and to become healthy again, genuinely.
And will this, obviously, Petrofac is a regional operator, a regional company, but it operates globally. But nonetheless, the big opportunity for the field operations, field supply chain in the Gulf, Sarah, is quite significant at the moment, where maybe elsewhere, I mean, we saw many of the supply chain companies leaving Russia, for example, for different reasons, sanctions and so forth. But I'm wondering, are we seeing that this region is attracting your peer group internationally because of the opportunity? Are we in a good place to be able to meet some of these ambitions because of that?
Well, Sean, what happened actually is we are seeing a lot of competition coming from the East because, those companies could not provide the kind of pricing that were needed at the low times. We saw a huge flood from Chinese and Korean and all these companies. And, the way these companies operate is completely different. So they're, and they can basically survive this kind of environment for some reason. I don't know how they operate back home, but I don't think there will be lack of service provision, but quality of service if we don't reverse the kind of low pricing cycle that we were in. I think, it will be a very challenging to meet the quality of service that you need in order to support the kind of upstream business you want.
Well, let's have Walter come in on that. Walter, some of the challenges there, are you willing to put your hand deeper in your pocket? Do you need to? Where do you see some of the challenges in meeting these ambitions? And particularly speaking to some of the specific technical challenge, right? We're talking water cut. Is there expertise in managing that? Talent available? Low carbon production. Is there talent available in that area? How do you address some of the points raised by Sarah?
Well, look, I think they're extremely valid points, actually, and I'm supportive of the challenges that Sarah's articulating. But I see it as a number of areas. So if we're going to be successful in accelerating what we need to do, we need to have money. We need to have people. We need to have services and equipment, and we need to have hydrocarbons. Now, in this region, hydrocarbons are not a problem. Plenty of hydrocarbons. Money in this region isn't necessarily an issue. And of course, individual companies, it depends, but you look at the fiscal balances that the countries have had recently with the high oil price, they've all got surplus. So there's plenty of money in the region for that. So it comes down to the resources, people. I look at it from the perspective, can I get the operator type technical people? Yes, I can. Why? Because they're pretty much available these days from the changes that have gone on in Europe and the US. And I'm starting to see that availability of really strong technical people that wasn't necessarily true 2-3 years ago. Where the challenges come is, as Sarah articulated, service sector's been hit very hard over the last couple of years. And I clearly can't do a lot of this work. I need a service company to provide the people and the equipment to do some of this for me. People are a challenge to get in the service sector, and you need money to get people. So it's a sort of chicken and egg thing. Supply chain has been hit very hard, and that's probably been the slowest thing to come back. We're still seeing supply chain issues. So getting equipment is a real challenge. So you've got these challenges to the service sector around money, people, and equipment, and you've got a challenge to us around getting equipment. So I see those as being the key things, as Peter articulated, resources, but I see it more as resources of equipment and money for the service sector and people for the service sector as being real issues for us to make this successful. Inevitably, that means prices for the service sector, rates are going to go up because there's competition. And I think this region will become the hot potato of the industry. The money's here, the hydrocarbons are here, and clearly this is a place where people can see they can accelerate their production, and they're going to go after it. Saudi announced massive spending, investment. The UAE, big investment. Oman wants to invest. Other countries in the region are all looking to increase their activities. That's going to require resources and competition. So I think it's going to be challenging, but it's going to be entertaining because there's going to be a lot going on here, and it will be back to a focal point for the industry.
Hatem, speaking to that point, are we in, if you like, on the dawn of another sort of hydrocarbon boom that we in the region, like we saw maybe in the 70s, or that given the region's importance to the new capacity that the world needs and the reluctance in other parts of the world to pursue that the opportunity is here. I'd like also to hear your views to some of the challenges that you're finding, and as you do your work, and to realize some of these opportunities and what you're doing to overcome those challenges.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to call it like the hydrocarbon boom of the 1970s, but definitely the potential for additional production in this region is higher than any other place in the world, especially the cost per barrel or million cubic feet. Having said that, it is not as low as it used to be in the past, and everything is more expensive. People are more expensive and even more scarce. We see competition for people. We see offers coming, for example, to some of our employees by other companies. Supply chain is more difficult. Financing costs, while it is, there's, as Walter said, there is money in the region. It's not available for everybody, and at the end of the day, it is causing the production cost to be higher, i.e., so the net profit per barrel will be reduced compared to the old days, even with the higher prices. So the $1 or $2 or $5 barrel cost no longer exists nowadays.
Of that multiple choice of challenges, Hatem, and Walter obviously spoke to some in which are manageable in order to realize these ambitions. Which ones do you, as a smaller operator, do you find are particularly challenges to realize some of your objectives? And we're seeing other operators in Ras Al Khaimah and elsewhere. Which of these multiple choice of challenges will be most pronounced for operators and your profile?
It's basically funding projects are becoming more expensive because of the competition for equipment and services. Even to find like a drilling rig, the rates are increasing every day for new drilling rigs. jobs, you see basically the cost of people is higher. So at the end of the day, the bid costs for all of these jobs are more expensive. Basically, everything is becoming more expensive because everyone's trying to produce more barrels after the very big slowdown during COVID. The whole world is in a catch-up mode, and we have not caught up yet with pre-COVID levels.
And of course, we've had the big, what they call the great resignation, the big resignation. I think our industry is right at the front of the queue of that. Peter, I wanted you to speak a little bit to the other challenge that the sector faces and realizing these targets as we come out of COVID and in this we had $100 oil year last year, the first one in many years on Brent. We're now in the low 80s, but the outlook forecast is relatively solid for the year ahead. But my question is about you mentioned obviously in ADNOC's $150 billion spend through 2030. They have a lot of international partners that make all of these things happen, as do they do in all the locations. But yet, as an international company, you are subjected to challenges in the energy transition in your home country of Austria, in other markets, as are all of the international operators. There's big pressure on the energy transition and even divestment from pension funds into your sector. So I'm wondering, how does that challenge impact here, where the partners are subjected to pressures in home markets and headquarter markets and markets where they're listed on stock exchanges in Europe and New York, and yet here those challenges are not present? I'm wondering, how does those two things, how are they going to coexist going forward over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. At the end, it's a portfolio game. And looking only at the region for international companies doesn't give the full picture. So at the end, and I think our company announced it in the strategy review, we have a target of carbon neutrality that includes Scope 1, own operations, Scope 2, and Scope 3. So that means every barrel oil that I produce here from this market has to be offset to be carbon neutral. So therefore, this affects me, of course, because that means that you have to bring, and we have geothermal and CCS, CCU, for example, in our portfolio, has to be built up. And that's where where I am, and many European companies are competing internally for funds. Now, luckily, the oil business is well established, and the rate of return, by the way, this is one of our main KPIs, apart from the efficiency. A rate of return is pretty good compared to the, let's say, geothermal or CCU, but I think that will change. And then to achieve carbon neutrality on Scope 3, that is the huge challenge. Scope 1, I think we are on a very, very good track. Methane efficiency, reducing flaring, Project Lightning here in the UAE, basically electrification of all the platforms. This will really go ahead, and we are on a perfect track for that. It costs a lot of money, but I think the main important thing is that the mindset is here. And the brilliant move to bring COP28 to the UAE, to bring the industry on the table and say, we have a lot to offer because we have a lot of leverage in reducing the carbon intensity. That was a really brilliant move. And I think this will really change a bit the mood towards technology, what technology can deliver. But you're absolutely right. I'm competing now with projects because I have to have an offset of my carbon footprint, not only in Scope 1, but only in Scope 3.
Sarah,
maybe one last word.
Please, yeah.
Maybe
ahead, Peter.
one last word, because you already opened the discussion on higher service rates.
Yeah.
I think the service rates, yes, you're right, it should be a fair game. And maybe in the past, due to the pressure, especially during COVID, it was not a fair game anymore. But the service rates should not be driven by the oil price. The oil price is clearly a remuneration for risk you take. And there are years, $26 oil price, where not many companies could sustain that. But what we see right now is that demand is picking up so much. This is, of course, fueling the service costs. And when we look at the rig count, especially offshore rig counts, and where the rigs are going to, there the competition has already entered the hot market. To get an offshore rig now, to attract it to your operations for your expansion, you pay not only premiums, you pay 30, 40, 50%, up to 80% more for an offshore rig that you could get 2 years for half price, I would say. So that is the big challenge, because I'm measured not on the oil price, I'm measured on efficiency. So therefore my unit costs is what counts, my unit costs and my return on investment. And if, as long as this stays fair with the service industry, then we have a good game. But otherwise, efficiency is what counts.
Sarah, I wanted to speak a little bit to the points you made earlier, and bringing in intersecting with some other points, that we are now in Kuwait, and we have been in Oman, in much more technically challenged reservoir management, right? The water cut issue is quite significant. And yet the other part of the puzzle you mentioned was during the down cycle years, the sort of emergence of a lot of Asian service providers, field operating, and where that expertise, I mean, the industry in the region has got the big appetite for the low Asian price, but does it come with the technical expertise to meet these increasing challenges like you would have at Barzan in Kuwait? Just to speak a little bit to that, please.
So, Sean, let's be clear. The only way you will know how to manage mature fields during decline is if you have done it before somewhere else. None of these Chinese companies or Korean companies have any kind of that expertise. Why? Because they've never operated. They don't have this kind of environment back home. Who has this kind of expertise are the companies who operate in the West, because in the US, in Australia, and the North Sea, you've already passed that. And so you know, looking back, how would you manage such fields to become efficient and not to repeat the mistakes of the past? So this expertise does not come from East. It has to come from West, and it has to be in the core heart of the knowledge for these, for companies who operate in this region. And that's why I believe there will be more collaboration between the national oil companies in the region and the international companies in order to achieve these targets. Without that collaboration, you will be in the phase of trial and error and trying to do things that, will not lead to good results. So the Chinese companies, to be fair, over the last 10, 20 years, the service providers have dramatically improved the quality of their services, but they are not at that top end of technology that you need coming from international companies who operate elsewhere in the world. It is not. So both will be needed. If you have a straightforward job that doesn't need that sophistication, you can use these Chinese companies or the Korean companies. But if you are going to the kind of efficiency in your operation that you need, you definitely need the international service providers that have gone through the various kinds of work in upstream, declining, mature fields.
On that point, Walter, I'd like to, if you could speak to a little bit about Oman's experience of that high water cut challenge. Has it conquered that challenge now? And we are seeing, to the point Sarah's making, that the likes of PDO, the national energy company in Oman, is taking that expertise that they have from operating and now providing it as an independent business service themselves to be available in the market. If you might just speak a bit to, because I think Oman is very much at the forefront of that mature field management challenge.
Well, look, absolutely. And personally, I produce more water than I do oil. And that's not an unusual position for any operator in this part of the world.
Well, I think in Oman, the average is 10 water to 1 barrel of oil.
Yeah,
not saying that's your cut, but
it's a lot. And it does depend. And that's where the technology piece that Sarah mentions becomes very important. So PDO, for example, very successful with a reed bed solution to a field that produced a lot of water. The reason that was so successful is very low salinity water, so they were able to deal with that. A lot of the water we produce here is very high salinity, super salinity water. That presents technical challenges about how you deal with that. Starting to come onto the market are some technologies that can clean that water. They're new, they're being trialed in this part of the world to see if they can be made economic on a large scale. But that kind of technology can be game changing for the likes of us that produce vast amounts of very high salinity water. So yes, it's becoming a key part of how the industry is going to go forward, how that late life field productivity is maintained. And it is important. Two aspects: one, dealing with the water you produce, and two, trying to reduce the amount of water you produce. So there's two, high-tech solutions there that need to be explored, developed, and operationalized, if I can use that word. So yes, vital to the future here, absolutely.
Hatem, just going into closing thoughts, I wanted to give each of you the opportunity to give as much as you would like to articulate what you see the year ahead to look like. I mean, there's a lot of geopolitics in the world. Want to comment on that or not? But what do you see for the oil and gas industry at the beginning of January 2023? We sort of come out of a year, 2 years in a way, 1 year where energy transition was an overwhelmingly dominant narrative. Then last year, energy security soared to the front of the queue, and it was all about, burning coal in Germany and, doing whatever you needed to do in order to keep the lights on. What does 2023 look like to you?
I think energy transition will remain a very key focus this year and in the future point forward. The other key thing that we are going to see, and we have been seeing for the last couple of years, is volatility. With geopolitical situation that's happening in the Ukraine, we're seeing this happening more often for different reasons by different parties. The other part is unforeseen events that we normally have not seen very often in the past, but they're coming more often, such as the pandemic. We've seen recently natural disasters, climate change affecting production, for example, in the Gulf of Mexico too often. And with global warming and climate change, I expect this is going to be coming a very normal occurrence that we have to always account for. So I think volatility is going to be key. And to be able to manage volatility, you need to have a cushion in availability of production. So if the world is producing at its maximum available capacity, any hiccup happening anywhere in the world will cause a spike up or a spike down in the production and the prices, which is not really good for anybody, not for the producers or the consumers. So the need for cushion is very critical.
Cushion. There's no idle capacity in the world, that's for sure. It would seem at least very little. Peter, your sort of closing thoughts, outlook for 23, as brief as you can be.
Yeah, as brief as it can be, attracting capital and human resources in a very competitive low carbon business versus classical hydrocarbon business world, and managing unit costs in an inflationary and also high demand environment.
Inflation is not going anywhere. Sarah Akbar, your closing thoughts and outlook for 2023.
Well, I guess this year will be a good year for the oil and gas, and I hope it will be a very good year for service companies, because they will really, get back to the real business after the kind of 2-3 years they were really sloppy and bad. So
Hatem was just looking out his window at all the Maseratis parked outside Petrofac, and he thinks they must be doing.
I hope it will be a good year, really, for our industry. Yeah.
Inshallah. Walter, since the last word with you, outlook for the year ahead. There's no shortage of big topics in the region, geopolitical and otherwise, but from the industry point of view, what do you think is the dominant trends?
I think it's going to be a very exciting year with a huge amount of activity, and I think it's going to be a very interesting place to be over the coming year.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think also be the sort of underlying pillar to all of our activity in the upstream space is the dollar. I mean, the oil price outlook remains quite solid. The underinvestment, capex underinvestment over the last 5 years is in a critical stage, and that will by itself give a very high floor to the oil price over the year ahead, which opens up the opportunity for many things. We need to wrap it up here because the next session is banging on the door. It's all about geopolitics the next hour, some very useful insights as to where the neighborhood may be going with that challenge. Peter Zellinger, OMV in Abu Dhabi, thank you. Walter in Oman, Hatem in Sharjah, and Sarah, of course, in Kuwait. Thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll move on to the geopolitical session. All the best.
Thanks, Sean. Thank you.
Thanks.